Welcome back, folks. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be talking about the new information that was recently revealed about the Book of the Dead at the most recent Paizo Live. There's quite a bit of fun stuff that was revealed, and I'm really looking forward to Book of the Dead even more now, somehow. For those of you who weren't aware, Book of the Dead is the next Pathfinder rulebook that is going to be releasing, and it's going to cover everything that you could want to know about the Undead. It's going to be releasing in late April, and it's pretty much a must-buy if you like fighting, being, or playing Undead. Without further ado, let's just start talking about everything that we've learned recently about the book. We are going to be covering everything in the order that the book will be covering it whenever it comes out. So the first section of the book is going to be called Prayers for the Living, and this is where you're going to be finding all of your information on PC options for fighting against Undead. Honestly, they don't talk about this section very much in this Paizo Live, so I don't really know what to expect from it. This is just wild speculating from me though, but I would really like to see an archetype that is based around manipulating positive energy to counterbalance all of the necromancer archetypes that we're about to see and talk about. Speaking of those archetypes though, the next section of the book is called Hymns for the Dead, and it's the opposite of the previous section. It has all of the options for PCs who want to fight with the undead, be undead, or raise the undead. If you're looking to play a necromancer and haven't found that there are good enough options for you that are currently available, this is the section for you. If you just want to play a funny skeleton man, this is also for you. While this isn't the largest section of the book, it is one of the sections that we learned the most about recently, and we heard quite a bit of fun stuff, especially some fun archetypes, and as anyone who has looked at my channel knows, I love me some archetypes. The first thing to talk about is the option to get an undead animal companion that presumably is going to be a little bit differently from how normal animal companions work. They are specifically called out as having zombie or vampire options that you can take for your companion, though they did not say remotely what the actual mechanical difference is, so I'm just going to throw out some very, spitballing guesstimations on what those kind of mechanical differences are going to be. I'd expect the zombie option to be a bit more tanky and to be able to really just take a hit well, because that is what zombies do after all in 2e. But the vampire option is a bit more ambiguous, because I could see some kind of healing ability or the ability to manipulate blood, or who knows, maybe it can just turn into a bat or slip through shadows, or really, vampires have a lot of different things that are iconic for them, so there's a little bit too much there for me to pick out what would work for a animal companion, because animal companions generally don't have a huge amount of abilities, so I don't know what they would pick and choose as most important for a vampire. Also, there's apparently an option for getting a literal zombie as a companion, rather than just getting a zombie animal, so you'll have, just a corpse following you around rather than the corpse of an animal. I assume that it's just going to be a stat block difference, and there isn't going to be a huge mechanical difference outside of it, since, that's just how 2e generally works, but I think it would be interesting if it has a very unique support benefit, or if it has bonuses to disguising as a normal, person that isn't a corpse or what have you. I just think that I'd want it to stand out as being something different and unique. Also, since I have no other better place to add this, there is going to be an undead eidolon that you can get that you can apparently drain its life, which I don't know exactly how you'll drain its life, but whatever it is, it sounds cool. Let's move on from animal companions, for now, as there are also other options for getting undead familiars. I assume that this is going to be some kind of familiar ability that you can choose, or a special familiar like the Clockwork Familiar that you can choose once you have enough familiar abilities to choose it. I'm personally hoping that you don't have to have a bunch of different abilities to get an undead familiar though, since that would probably mean that it would be very hard to get an undead familiar at level 1, and that's fun for nobody involved. If you want to see some kind of funny art, then I really do recommend checking out the stream, because there's some great art of an undead monkey that is really funny. Next up, let's talk about the traditional archetypes that were mentioned during the stream, and you'll get what I mean by traditional archetypes in a little bit. Only two traditional archetypes were talked about, but I'm confident that there's going to be way more of them in the book itself, because this is Paizo we're talking about here. They just put out so many archetypes and so many character options that only having 2 would be legitimately weird. First up, the Re-animator archetype is all about making more undead, and presumably has the ability to actually control the ones that they make. Currently, the only way to create undead is to use the create undead ritual, which can be a bit cumbersome. You have to learn the ritual for every single type of undead that you try and make, which can be kind of problematic. So it's like, if you want to make skeletons, that is a different ritual than the ritual to make zombies, or the one to make ghouls, or the one to make a vampire. All of those, you have to learn it multiple times, so it is genuinely pretty cumbersome. It also costs a lot of money, which doesn't seem that bad whenever you look at it, but it really adds up over time. I can see a couple of ways that the Re-animator archetype can make this a bit more streamlined. First, I'd like to see a feat that allows for you to not need any secondary casters to cast the ritual, or to be able to use undead under your control to help you perform the ritual, and instead of, using secondary casters. So instead of having a buddy of yours chant along with you, you just have a zombie that chants with you. Loose lips is generally a very, very bad thing for someone who's trying to do something as generally seen as taboo as a necromancer. Secondly, I'd like to see a feat or feats to reduce both the time and cost for casting the ritual. I don't think that it would be all that broken to reduce the cost a little bit, so long as you make sure that the cost isn't reduced for around the level that you're currently at. So if you are level 10, the cost for creating a level 10 undead is not reduced, but the cost for making a level 4 or lower undead is, because a level 4 or lower undead is not actually going to be helping out in a level 10 combat. It's just too low level that it isn't going to be doing anything. But, in a purely hypothetical situation, under the current rule set, a level 15 necromancer can only raise a single person in one night. So you'd imagine that a powerful necromancer let loose on a local graveyard could raise it all in a single night, but unfortunately that isn't true. They can only raise one person a day, and they still have to pay money for it. So I'd like a feat or feats that can make that easier and really allow you to fulfill the fantasy of a necromancer raising a shit ton of things overnight and causing absolute chaos. The last feat that pops into my head for this archetype is that it'd be very cool to have a feat that allows you to have more minions at a time, or the ability to grab uncontrolled mindless undead nearby and make it your minion. The current limit on number of minions is 4 at once, but it would be nice to have some backups, and it's not going to be all that broken, since you still have to use your actions to command undead to do things. So if you can have 10 undead minions at a time, it's not all that much difference because your actions in combat are still limited. The second archetype that is talked about in Paizo Live is the Undead Master archetype, which is basically just the spooky version of the Beastmaster archetype. And one of these days I'm actually going to make a video on the Beastmaster archetype because it's very, very good, but it's a long one, so I'll get to it eventually. If you do want an undead animal companion though, but you aren't a spellcaster to actually, make them undead yourself, then this is the archetype for you. It'll presumably allow you to get all of the feats that you need to make animal companions competitive in combat, while also giving other feats that really play into how having an undead companion is different than having an animal companion. Honestly, the Beastmaster archetype is incredible already, so having an undead version of it is already a step in the right direction. I'd like to have some special feats that you can take depending on whether or not your companion is a zombie or a vampire, but even if those don't exist, I'd be happy, since having a creepy companion on any class is already enough to make me happy. The final bit to talk about from this section is the ancestry and ancestry-related archetypes. The only ancestry in this book is the skeleton ancestry, and we heard a bit about a couple of the feats that are related to it. The first feat that you can get is a level 1 feat called Play Dead, which does exactly what it says it is. You just lie on the ground and look like the bag of bones you are, which presumably makes most people assume that you're dead and not animate. The other feat is apparently the ability to shoot bone missiles, which I refuse to see as anything other than pulling off a rib bone and chucking at someone. I have a couple of things that I'm hoping to get from this ancestry to really differentiate itself and really play into the fantasy that I have going into things with a skeleton character. First, I want there to be a feat or a heritage that gives you the quick squeeze feat, or maybe an even better version of that feat. Lacking all the meaty bits and bops makes you a lot lighter and so much thinner, so I feel like it'd be representative of the character trope. The idea of a skeleton ripping off their own arm and then shimmying through a hole in the wall, then sticking back on their arm is great. Similarly, and kind of for very, very similar reasons, I'd like to see either quick jump or powerful leap be available since skeletons are substantially lighter than someone who has all of their muscles. For the record, and yes, I did kind of ruin my search history for this, a human skeleton generally makes up about 14% of the weight of the average human, and obviously this would be different for different fantasy races, and real-world physics doesn't necessarily apply, but I feel like having extra mobility options because you're super, super light would be fun. I talked earlier about kind of ancestry-adjacent archetypes, and those are archetypes that you can take that represent you turning into some kind of intelligent undead, like ghouls, vampires, mummies, or liches. Outside of making me excited just hearing about them, we unfortunately didn't learn much about most of these options. But we did hear a lot about liches since Jason Bowman was especially excited about them. You can take the archetype to turn into a lich at level 12, and presumably if you do the full ritual and it takes a long time and it's personal and all that, but we didn't talk about that during Paizo Live, so unfortunately we just have to think about it. You can take the archetype at level 12, and while you never get the full power of the lich that you find in the bestiary, you still get a lot of its abilities. This is just because Pathfinder 2e is generally very balanced, and if you got the full power of, the bestiary version, you would not be remotely balanced. A couple of different abilities were listed that you can get though. You can drain your soul cage, which allows for you to cast a spell that you have prepared, slow people with a touch, and, the core one of not dying unless your soul cage is also destroyed. I have a couple of hopes for this archetype. First, I hope that it isn't restricted to just arcane casters. In 1e and other previous editions, there were different types of liches for different types of magic, and I'd love to see that represented in 2e by having feats that you can take for different spellcasting traditions. A druid lich would of course be different than an arcane witch and a occult lich. Also, I hope that liches have abilities that aren't just useful to spellcasters. I know that most of their abilities are going to be spellcaster focused, but I hope that not all of them are, since the idea of a fighter lich is incredibly cool, and I want it to not just be possible, but actually be decent. We didn't learn all that much about the third section of the book, the Grim Crypt, but we do know that it will be filled with the stat blocks for Undead, and it's going to be the largest section of the book, clocking in at over 100 pages. It'll have all types of undead in it, along with some fan-favorite options from previous editions like undead gunslingers, druids, or just floating skin that wraps itself around you and is absolutely horrific. We did learn some fun stuff about liches though, since, Jason Bowman was excited about them. Like, there's a lich that decided that just being a skeleton was lame, and decided to augment themselves with magical items and wands and all that. There's also another type of lich that was, it decided that just being a skeleton was lame, and decided that'd be way cooler to be skeletons instead of just a skeleton. I'm really looking forward to seeing what other types of horrific monsters await inside, outside of just, the Rune Lich and the Horde Lich. Undead are generally super fun with very engaging stat blocks, so I just want to see cool undead, man. The last section of the book is one that we actually do know a fair bit about, while also simultaneously knowing pretty much nothing about. It's called Land of the Dead, and it's a collection of lore about places in Golarion where undead are common, presumably with a focus on how the people of that region consider undead and deal with them in their day-to-day life. I say we have a lot of information about it because some parts of Golarion, like Ustalav especially, are very, very documented regions, and we know a lot about, how Ustalav works. Some other regions, like Geb, though, we basically have no information. So, as someone who really loves Golarion lore, this is honestly one of the sections I am most looking forward to reading. The final section is an adventure written by Jason Bowman for level 3 characters that presumably is absolutely filled with the undead. We don't have all that much information on it outside of its name, which is March of the Dead, and that it takes place in a location where a lot of people have died, which honestly doesn't tell us much, considering that that's not all that surprising, considering that it's dealing with a lot of undead. I don't know if I'm actually going to be playing it since I'm already in 3 campaigns, but for people that do, Jason Bowman generally has a good track record for making good adventures, so I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm gonna try and find time in my schedule at some point to actually play it. Overall, I'm incredibly hyped for Book of the Dead. Undead are my favorite type of enemy to fight in all of 2E, and I feel they set up for incredibly interesting sort of combats and just environments, because I like spooky atmospheres. I mean, I know it's just my take on things, but I just like spooky campaigns, man. So I'm really excited to see what kind of still cool stat blocks are implemented, and I'm super excited for all the player options. I know that I'm not all that likely to play an Undead or a Necromancer in most campaigns, just due to the type of player that I am, but in the particular campaigns where they will be relevant, I'm looking forward to it so much. Seriously, somehow it has made me look forward to the Bloodlords AP even more than I was already, and April cannot come quick enough so I can just read this dang book. I want to read it so badly. Thanks for watching the video. What are you personally looking forward to most for, just about Book of the Dead as a whole? I'm personally super excited to just be able to play a skeleton, as there are so many jokes that I can think of to make due to being a skeleton. I just want to make so many bone jokes. Also, I didn't cover everything that was said in Paizo Live, so if you want to, learn actually what they said from the source, which is the best way to do it, rather than just, some guy on the internet, you can go and watch the VOD on the Paizo official Twitch channel. So that is the best way to actually learn everything that they said and what they are trying to get across. There's also a very good write-up of everything that happened on Reddit that I'm going to be linking in the description. I'm linking both of them in the description, by the way. Regardless, I hope you live a wonderful life.